For the record, Greenpeace came to New Plymouth and did a dioxin expose, and it was quality. They did share a lot of information, and they were somewhat supportive. But I would say, while they were there, they were invited to take part in a nonviolent act against Dow. For 3 months previous to Greenpeace's arrival in New Zealand, I made up hundreds of little white crosses, white wooden crosses about this big. And the idea was to put them all over Dow's front lawn at about 3 or 4 in the morning and hide across the street in the bushes with a video camera and videotape some Dow employee picking up all the little white crosses, and then we're going to post it on the internet in reverse, saying that Dow was doing an active compassion on their day of disgrace, and it showed them decorating their own front yard, turning it into a graveyard for all the kids they've killed in New Plymouth. Nonetheless, Greenpeace had to check with U.S. corporate office before they were allowed to participate in a nonviolent act like that. And corporate USA said, no, that won't be allowed, and they promptly called the police on me. Unfortunately for them, it rained like hell at 3:34 in the morning, and we went ahead and proceeded with the attack on Dow with the little white crosses, in spite of Greenpeace and their police. One of the constant problems of dioxin, health reports, anyone in dioxin-exposed diets is all of a sudden noticing a diabetes epidemic. This headline repeats itself here on Maui, almost word for word. As the dioxin investigation in New Zealand got moving along, more media started to take notice, and we would appear in various TV shows or short mentions in documentaries and newspaper articles. But in 2002, I received a call from Hyacinth Henderson in Dunedin, New Zealand, which is the South Island. Hyacinth Henderson was the midwife for the Taranaki New Plymouth Hospital. And she called and said that during the period of Dow's first years, there was horrific birth defects a lot of the times, and that these babies were not returned to their parents for burial. They were stored in the basement in jars, and that their parents never knew this. Their parents were given coffins with bags of sand or a rock or something. But in any event, she said I should have a look and see if they're still there, so I did, and I went up and I found 167 kids in jars of horrific birth defects in the basement of the Taranaki Base Hospital. I took pictures of those kids. When those pictures were presented first to the police and then to the hospital, the head of the hospital left, and in from Australia came a new district health board chief executive named John O'Neill. He is pictured here on the front page of the news saying there's an outrage over baby claims, the claims about the babies in the newspaper, holding up a copy of Investigate magazine and saying it is a quote-unquote load of bullshit. John O'Neill said the fetus allegations were a load of bullshit, and he was disgusted by the story. John O'Neill said this because he knew that the fetuses in the jars had been spirited away in a van to Auckland, New Zealand, and he could stand by this counter full of samples from biopsies and whatnot, and there was, if there was search warrants were served, there's no kids in jars. Well, over the first several years, from 1997 to on, I made great friends with many Maori people who knew about Dow, and they'd had all the problems for years. They'd seen the newspaper articles for many years. And I got a call from my chief, Matiu Tarawa, and he asked me to please come to Auckland to help in the investigation. what we found was at the same time the New Plymouth News came back out and said, well, there might have been hospital body parts, but they were moved and they were unclear on where these body parts went. At the same time, myself and others served a search warrant on the Auckland Green Lane Hospital in the form of a suitcase with Osama bin Laden written on it, evacuating the hospital. Whereas the 7 or 6 Maori chiefs went in the back door of the hospital, proceeded to the basement of Green Lane Hospital, found my 167 babies in jars, and 1,300 more. All of these children in jars without their parents' permission. This is a girl born with no brain. This is atypical of Vietnam veterans kids, Vietnam people, and New Zealand people. This is anencephaly. This is her whole body. You can see this child was a Maori. This is a girl who was born with a full facial mastoma. Now this is the kind of cancer one would get after 50 years of cigarette smoking. This child was born with this. And this child survived for 2 years. They cut this off her face and patched her together with a flap of skin from her butt and put her in an institution in Christchurch where there's a lot of these kids. This is a nuclear bomb explosion depicted over the New Plymouth plant, reminding people that it is in fact a radiomimetic substance, the dioxin, that occurred all over New Zealand and Vietnam. This is a picture Hyacinth sent me, and what's unique is she is showing you here that there is a vagina, that this child has dual sex organs, is both male and female, and the vagina's, the leg is off-centered and there's like a joint in the wrong place on the hip, seriously clubbed foot. This went on for years in New Zealand until the advent of abortion. Failure to close the Dow chemical plant or act resulted in a second retaliatory publication by Investigate magazine, in which people admitted they knew the entire neighborhood was dioxin contaminated. This is what many kids here in Maui now are suffering. This is a spina bifida. I have personal friends near pineapple fields who are suffering spina bifida in their children. This is Diane Hebert. She's an activist in Michigan. She's been fighting Dow there, where they've ruined the rivers with specifically 2378. This is Herbert Dow. There was someone named Dow, a company founder, actually a well-intentioned individual in the early days. This is a goonard. I caught this fish and I put that cut in the gallbladder of that fish, so you may see it is not a full of air, a gallbladder full of air. That's a tumor in a goonard. Okay, so what happened from there? Once the babies were discovered in jars, the Hart families, as they were described, started a class action lawsuit, as you do. During this time, the Maori and myself went on investigations as to who was responsible for all these children winding up in jars without their parents' permission, and we discovered a veritable X-Files show going on in New Zealand. For one, a strange requirement of the New Zealand judicial system is that you perform several years as a coroner. What judicial system on earth says you must cut on dead people in order to become a judge? I want you to ask New Zealanders when you see them, WikiLeaks task force is going on. That's the politest WTF there is. I would remind people that Helen Clark, the Prime Minister of New Zealand pictured here, went on to become the head of something at the World Health Organization in the United Nations. She's running around free and loose on American soil in New York. Oh, anyone so inclined can effect a citizen's arrest. I helped draft the Maori government declaration of war. There is in fact a legitimate war going on in New Zealand, and not all wars need to be fought with bloodshed and guns and bombs and butchering. Some wars can be fought with intellect. We can start depriving the rich and the sick of access to certain things, and we need to start using that creativity here on Maui. I would notice here on this same page, this is 2002. This is John O'Neill, who went suddenly absent from managing the Taranaki Hospital with the babies in jars and stayed disappeared on the payroll successively for 2.5 years, getting paid, I think, $750,000 to keep his mouth shut about Dow babies. This is the day this report came out. This is the dioxin concentrations in residential soil, Paratutu, New Plymouth. This report cost $500,000, and it took a year's worth of fighting to keep it away from the United States or New Zealand testing authorities. This report was done by the Hatfield Group of British Columbia. That's significant because the people of the United States and their Department of Veterans Affairs didn't suddenly get a degree of compassion. It took years of fighting for Vietnam veterans to get compensation in court for radiomimetic dioxin exposure, and it was the Hatfield Group of British Columbia that did it. And they submitted this report in response to 57 or 52 soil samples, we'll cover that in a second, taken from around my neighborhood and as far into town as 4 miles away from the chemical plant. Now, immediately, the newspaper says, in spite of this report, which I'm going to show you in a second, the dioxin level safe, says report. This is the media. And you're going to fight this here on Maui. The Maui News will tell you GMO is safe, dioxin is safe. Before I get to the report, I want to sidetrack 1 second. Bring up an individual responsible. This is Arnost Radislav. Arnost Radislav is a very unique person because an 80-year-old New Plymouth man who died in a car accident with the damage on the passenger side and the airbag deployed, a very slow-motion car accident, was an honorary consul to the former Czechoslovakia. Arnost Radislav, 80, fled Czechoslovakia for New Zealand in 1948, fearing for his life when communists took over the country. At that time, he had been a junior lecturer studying for a PhD at Prague University. This is the most deceptive news article possibly ever written. When communists took over the country from the Nazis, he was studying a PhD at Prague University in nerve gas and chemical weapons. Arnost Radislav is on a tape I have admitting to gassing Jews with 2,4,5-T and how it worked much better than the Zyklon B. This is the dioxin concentrations residential soil, Paratutu, New Plymouth. It was embargoed until 12 noon, September 26, 2002. The report states, the former IWD plant was the principal source of 2378 TCD present in the soil and in the area. Contamination occurred via discharges to air with subsequent disposition over the residential neighborhood. I'm going to show you two maps now and explain what they depict. At each site, this is the Dow chemical plant, and this is the town of this is Paratutu, this is New Plymouth, this direction. Each of these sites had 6 plugs taken here. My house is right here. That's my home on Merrimack Crescent. The low was 5.9, the high was 8.1. 4 miles out was 2.4 and 4.4. There. Across the street from the Dow plant, these homes here, we had 92 as a low and 98.8 as a high. Map 2, which shows the wind direction, these are the figures they published. They picked the low number, 5.9, 92, 2.4. This indicates the percentage of time the direction the wind blows from the crackling tower. The incinerator is here. The crackling tower is where 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T are mixed. Now, the response to this report was that Helen Clark, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and her Minister of Health, Annette King, and Ruth Dyson, basically the entire government of New Zealand is women, took this report and they took a decimal point out of the United States EPA safety data regarding 2378 TCDD. The magazine article explains for aficionados of detail. Well, when you're talking radiomimetic substances measured in the parts per trillion, detail is everything. By taking the decimal point out of the US EPA safety data and declaring the neighborhood safe, they sentenced 5,000 people to death. Now, what this shows in these soil samples taken from these yards is external, okay? Since 1948, the wind has blown these airborne contaminants into these homes, into the attics, the wall cavities, and the crawl spaces underneath these homes where there has been no insect traffic, no lawn mowing, no sunshine, no birds, none of the solar breakdown, nothing that would deplete this. So if it is 30 times US EPA evacuatable levels across the street from the factory, it is much higher inside the homes. In the early days of the investigation, a newspaper article came out showing the Dow chemical plant and explaining what exactly had happened. This was called the poisoning of New Zealand. in this article showed Caroline Bond. She had learning difficulties after being exposed to 2,4-D, the same kind of pesticide that just blew all over Paia. Her father is Keith Bond. This man here, when she developed learning difficulties and been sprayed with agricultural chemicals, he attended the Dioxin Summit in the United States. These are New Zealand helicopters spraying deadly chemicals right near cattle that are going to eat them up and put them on American plates via McDonald's. Now, in October 2002, Keith Bond sent me an email. It said, hello, my name is Keith Bond. I came to visit you and Don with Andrew Gibbs when the Dow thing first blew up. The cops had been after Don, and I copied all the paperwork associated with that. Keith was aware I broke into the Dow Chemical Company and took all their papers out. Keith left me with a roll of film and asked me if I would take pictures of what exactly was being incinerated at the chemical plant, which I said no problem. So he said he was coming back from the Dioxin Summit in the United States, as I showed you in this magazine, and he would be back to see me. Any answers have to wait till next week. I replied, hello Keith, Don here, fresh out of jail again this morning. I not only took drums and photos, crushed and ready, I still got that and plenty of other evidence. I got arrested Friday, 3 a.m. from Dow. They sent special cops to try and block my bail. I think it was FBI agents. But with the last 14 charges dropped, the new Maori judge could smell a rat. Anyway, I'm off to bed and we'll inform more later. He said, you're right, hang in there. I'll see when I get back, but watch out, there's rats everywhere, so look after yourself. On the morning Keith Bond was supposed to come see me, I get a call from my friends saying, please turn on the TV real quick. Keith Bond, instead of coming to see me from attending the Dioxin Summit in the United States, decided to douse his home, his cars, and his barn, and himself in gasoline and go up in flames.